Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show, we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Hellbound. A great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I have not read the webtoon for this series that this series is based on, so this is my first experience with this story. So I had a lot of preconceived notions going into this series. Like, one being, I thought this was like a worldwide known thing, but it's still in a process that the general public is still like trying to debate whether or not what's going on is real. So I thought that was kind of a nice introduction, because you have people being like, oh, that video, it's like this, oh, that, you know, they're talking about Jinsu, and being like, oh, like, is he like, he looks like such a normal guy. I can't believe he's crazy. I mean, it's like, look at this. Obviously, it's CGI and stuff like that. So, like, the fact is that people are still in disbelief about this. And it isn't just, and I think that's interesting, because I feel like a lot of webtoons typically, I mean, and I think this applies to manga too, like a lot of stories of that nature typically don't go international. But this story does seem like it is it's implicated around the world, but we're focusing on what's happening specifically in Korea, specifically Seoul. But it's like, yeah, I mean, that's true to any, like, I mean, I think manga and manhwa, like, are true to, like, yeah, they take place either in Japan or, you know, Korea. But every once in a while, they'll touch on international stuff. But it's like, it makes sense. I mean, when the creators are from us, you're always going to speak personally from home. So it's just one of those things. But it's interesting to know, like, yeah, this isn't just like, because some stuff will just be allocated to where the setting of the story is. So it could easily just be like, oh, this is specifically a Korea thing. I mean, even look at Squid Games. That's an international thing, at least has international elements to it. We're just focusing on the games in Korea that we're aware of. So it's just that interesting thing. But that poor guy got it hard. I wasn't expecting that. I mean, it's almost like, considering how they kill you at the end, they basically burn you, and that's how they send your soul to hell. They literally, all that's left are like burnt, like your burnt skeleton is all that's left. So I think it's so interesting that that's the end result. Why do they literally brutalize you beforehand? But I guess it's supposed to be like, no, this ain't supposed to be some easy trip to hell. It's like, now you need to be punished. Like, I guess they do that because everyone runs and is supposed to immobilize you, because maybe they need time to do what they got to do. Like, if you're still moving and stuff like that, it makes the process even harder. So I mean, maybe you can almost look at it like a lion hunting its prey. Like, you have to play with it a little, tenderize it a little bit, then gobble it up. You know, maybe there's an equivalency there. But like I said, they brutalized that dude. They were beating the smack out of him, like tossing. They legitimately hulked like him, like Hulk did Loki in the first Avengers movie. They slammed him around like that. And it's also interesting too, because like, they're in to kill the person they're after, but they're willing like to plow through any and everything in its way. Like, they're not like here to be subtle about it. It's like, nah, we come in, we after you. They're considered the quote unquote executioners, so that's what we'll kind of label them for now. But home dude, like, one grabbed him by the head and like just slid his face against the like the bus, and was like pressing his, I thought he was just gonna squish his head. It's like, nah, held him up while the other two clawed him up. It reminded me, if you've ever seen Supernatural, it reminds me of the Hellhounds. Those things will rip you to pieces, and they were kind of doing that. I was like, oh, this is brutal. And then they burned them, and then they just casually disappear. The fact is, I think it's interesting that the particular ways they pop in, like, obviously they just popped out of nowhere because they go through essentially like a portal. But I'm curious, do they actually need a doorway to represent said portal? Because like, when they first pop up, like, we hear the rumbling at first. So part of me wonders, are they invisible at first? Because like, you know, using that example, I'm familiar with the Hellhounds from Supernatural. You legitimately can't see them. You need special stuff to be able to see them at all, but typically they're invisible. I think demons might be able to see them. I think just a normal human eye can't see them, because they're invisible at first, but everyone heard the thumping, and then all of a sudden, when they smashed, right before they smashed their glasses, when they just pop out of existence. But when they were done, they ran to like the rotating door of like a hotel or something, and as it was spinning, like, they went through a portal. So like, I'm wondering, do they actually need something as a symbolism of a door to actually act as the portal, or did that just have to be like a stylistic choice the creator chose? I'm curious, because my understanding, and I'm only knowing this because I'm hearing this secondhand, because on the RT podcast, Hellbound came up, and Cole had talked about that it's more, the series is more so, and once again, I'm hearing this secondhand, it seems like it's mainly about not why that happens and what that's all about, but more so like the world's reaction to it, that this cult, the new truth, as we find out in this, it's all about, it's more circling them and how what they've built around it. That's mainly it. It's kind of an example. So it's like one of those things, like, this is just the way the world is, and we're just focusing on, like, it just, that's why I was kind of interested by the fact that it's still an unknown commodity in this world, that it's not like because I was under the impression like everyone in the world knew this is what happened, just accept. It's like, no, it's still a fresh enough thing, because even the new truth itself, this religion, has only been around for the past 10 years. So the question then becomes too, like, how, like, has this always been a thing, and has it only recently been starting to get captured on camera? I'm curious. Because what circles this all is religious overtones of like, yeah, this is God's punishment. We finally know God's will. He's punishing the evil. And I think that's such a fascinating thing. Like, this show does so many things you would never think they would. Like, first and foremost, we're getting the police perspective on it. We're getting a detective. We're getting everything viewed from the lens, and I'm going to butcher it. I'm terrible with, I think, pronouncing like Korean names. I feel like I butchered them in particular. But Kyun is, I think, his name. It's Jin Kyun-hum, but I would just probably try and call him by his last name, which I wonder if they still consider that surnames. I mean, I think it's still considered like a surname in Japan, because I know the Japanese equivalent would just be called like, oh, that's your family name, your surname. But I'm like, do they specifically call it that in Korean or not? I'm sure probably. Regardless, tangents aside, but they're looking at this from like a perspective of, we got to investigate, because even when the detectives during the meeting was like, oh wait, are those things even human? It's like, I don't know. We'll find out when we arrest him. I'm like, you're thinking about arresting one another? That's crazy. But I mean, it's like, yeah, you don't know what it is. You're just like, it's something, and we gotta piece the general public, because people have seen the videos circulating from this, and like, people are freaked out, want to understand. But especially like Kyohnun's partner, Yumpyo, he looked into the doctrine of this new truth. Obviously, the dude who is kind of the head honcho of it, who's seen as the leader, Jung Jiansu. And so it's interesting because it's coming from the perspective, the doctrine believes, they put it out there, that they believe that those are people who are evil. Now, we find out about Kyung-hoon's situation. His wife was murdered, and the guy who killed her got released. We actually learned the details a lot more later on about, he was sentenced to 10 years. It was a much leaner sentence, and even people were like, why is that? And turns out there were drugs involved. Like, he might not have been in the right mindset, so it lessened the charge. I would think that wouldn't matter in this particular case, high or not, you still committed this atrocity. Like, if it was a mental, maybe the drugs and mental health kind of get looped together. So it's like, you weren't in a mentally stable position because of drugs, so you aren't 100% responsible for what you did. Maybe that's his justification, because he didn't even serve the full 10 years. He served 6 and he was released. But that ends up being a conversation as they talk to Jinsu, because he's there at the scene of the crime. And once again, he showcases, like, this isn't just a Korea thing. There's one in Nicaragua. I butchered that. And other places, that this, once again, is like a worldwide phenomenon. Even he talks about his experience. He first experienced this on a Tibetan plane, because it turns out, like, he's like, I'd given up on life. It was really interesting learning, like, he does have like a religious background, because he grew up in like a Christian orphanage. And once he turned 20, he wanted to kill himself because he felt like there was nothing more to live for. And it's like, why 20? It's like, well, once you're 20, you're able to leave the orphanage. Like, because I guess that's interesting to know the age difference. Because I think in a foster care system, you're out of the foster care system moment you turn 18. I think it's so interesting that it's 20, but also, like, Korea does age a little differently, like, especially, like, you're actually older than what you are, because of just, like, how, because I've seen places reference that, and even, I think they even talked about on an RT podcast, since I was referencing it earlier, they had talked about birthdays and stuff like that, and how, like, Korea, like, I think your time in the womb still counts, so, like, you are technically a year older than so, like, I'm 29, but in the Korean culture, I would be 30 already, because I'm technically a year older because of my time. The time in the womb still counts, so that's a whole interesting conversation in itself. But because I've seen that reference in some like webtoon and manhwa that I've read in the past. So, but I so I guess that'd be the equivalency, because you'd be like, basically the equivalency here in the US would be like 19, but still. And you would get money to kind of like go out there in the world after leaving the orphanage, and he wanted to not have anyone see him kill himself. So I wonder, is that just a byproduct of just like, and it seems like something that's kind of like, because obviously showing that is seen as shameful. I think I don't think that's just an Asian culture thing. I think that can resonate, that aspect can resonate other places when it comes to like suicide and stuff. But he went to a mountain and he saw the quote unquote executioners doing their thing, and for him that instilled, he found a new purpose in life, and he found that for him, he spent the rest of the time traveling looking for signs of God, and obviously he's picked up on this and he's latched onto this, and he tries to because MPO and Kyunhun were talking to him, and he's like, oh, well, you think I'm a cult leader, that I'm taking advantage of these people? He was like, no, I take the train because I don't want anyone twisting it to make it seem like I'm doing this for something else. But the fact is, he even leaned into Kyun's circumstances, because his daughter Hee-young she's a part of this. She was at least volunteering. She talked to her dad, was like, yeah, I just checked it out of curiosity, but like, are we done? And so it's like, obviously he's still like, we don't know how long it's been since her killer got released. It's still probably, it's definitely still a fresh enough wound that he's still processing and dealing with it in his own regards, because even his coworkers are, it's a thing of like, no matter how much time has passed, I'm sure you're going to still tiptoe around it, because his partner was still tiptoeing around it. A lot of people are. It's like, considering, because even his chief was like, hey, if you need more time off, he's like, what would I do in my free time? Like, investigating and being a detective is kind of all that. Like, what else would I do in my free time? And because the chief wanted him to take time off, so it's still, I would expect because of the context, it would be a fresh enough wound, but it still could be like I'm like, fresh wound or not, that's still going to stay with you, and I'm still sure people are going to walk on eggshells around you in that particular regard. But it definitely seemed like him and his daughter aren't having a good relationship, because I guess like after his wife died, we see him show up at the courtroom. It seemed like he might have been, he was distraught, but he was probably drunk too, understandably, but it's like, he probably wasn't there for his daughter when she needed him, because he was, granted, he had to figure his way past it too, so it's like, I'm dealing with in my own right, like, it's hard to be there to help someone else when you're trying to figure out the same thing as well. So he probably didn't go about it in the best way, so it probably complicated his relationship with his daughter. So, like I said, with all this supernatural like thing going around, it's so interesting, because that's the world building on the outside, but like the crux of the story is on the human level and everyone's experiences with this. And because it is really interesting to see like the reactions, like I said, the various reactions, like straight up having the cops look into it. But it's also interesting because there's a subsection of the New Truth. It's a group known as Arrowhead. Basically, they blast like criminals, like information. They dox everybody. Like if you're a bad guy, they will dox you and stuff like that. And they believe themselves to be like, they are the more radical extremists of the New Truth. At least that's how Jinsu like at least perpetrates it like that. Who they might be a lot more like closely tied than he would ever be willing to admit. Because we see like, I don't know if he's the head of Arrowhead, but he's definitely their vocal, like, spokesperson. He's, like, basically doing, like, a stream, and he's calling out this, guy. His name is, like, Kim. I forgot what he was exactly. Oh, he's, like, a novelist, and he basically spoke about the fact is that people should basically follow their own thoughts instead of following like the herd mentality, because a lot of people are pushing this narrative forward about all of this. That is like, no, like have your own thoughts. And then they hard cut to a live stream of a whole bunch of kids like beating the crap out of him. It's like, oh yeah, like, fanatics of a cult like acting like this, and these are children. That's also the complicated thing. They're minors, so there's only so much they can be charged. Like the most they'll probably get is like juvie at best. It's like they brutalized that dude. They kidnapped him and beat the ever living crap out of them. And when they do get arrested, they're like, oh, who, you're trying to scare us like juvie and stuff like that, because it's like, because even Yumpyo tried to talk to him by being like, right, God punishes those who do evil, right? But they're like, really? But they're like, you got it twisted, because do you even listen to the New Truth's doctrine? So what they do is probably considered okay. in the Doctrine's eyes, because it's like, oh, you're punishing evil, so we're not going to get punished. So they're not worried about it. All it takes is for this situation to shift. Because currently, like, they're so okay with what they've done, because they're like, because I was about to say, like, aren't you worried about ramifications? Like, you believe in, like, evil people are being punished, so would you be punished? But it's like, no. We're in the guidelines of, like, no, it's like, we're talking about evil people, exposing evil, hurting evil. That's not evil. That's justice. So that could be the, we're on some, like, light Yagami type of stuff of like, oh, like, I'm doing evil for the greater good. The ends justify the means. I'm killing people, but I'm killing bad people. But then you get into that point where you're killing good people to cover up the fact is you're killing bad people. It means that you're going after L because L's trying to stop you, but you're like, I'm justice. I'm trying to be a new god in this world. There's definitely that philosophical parallel of just like, just the general means of, do the ends justify the means, is definitely going on here, and I think that's going to be a resounding element of this series. I mean, it could be at the very least. But like I said, home dude, like on the doing the arrowhead, like representing and stuff like that, being like, oh, like, it's like, oh, the guy like asks for forgiveness and stuff like that, but he should have thanked us because we are enacting God's will. And that's what the premise of all this is, that like, oh, it's God's will for all this to happen. Like, because even putting the guy who died in the beginning on blast, because it's like, right, if he was killed that way, if the executioners came from, he was evil. So what instead of the cops investigating the executioners, trying to figure this out, trying to catch him, it's like, no. Find out what this guy did, expose him. That's the better point of your time. And so later on, the cops are getting call after call about like, nah, look into this dude, because Arrowhead has enough like sway and power to be able to like gather information on people, that they shouldn't be able to. They have enough resources to get information that probably only the cops would. But yeah, the conversation is like, how are we supposed to investigate and indict someone that's already dead? Like, the cops normally wouldn't look into that, but maybe there is some truth to it, but who knows? I mean, I think that's probably, and that's going to add more fuel to the fire when it turns out, hey, there's validity to what they said. Like this guy, because everyone that's been killed so far, because Jinsu's only got like one video of the angels doing their thing, and now this newest video from like what's happened in this episode. But like, he's like, all over the world, there've been like deaths that are similar to how the executioners kill people, so he believes them to be victims of it. But it could easily be him trying to sway that to fit the narrative he wants to be. Like, once again, he's that smooth operator, because you see the way people act, like the old lady on train, like, oh, like, take my spot. He's like, no, I'm good. And it's just like, oh my god, it's Jinsu, like, oh my god, like, oh, what is he doing? Like, he's definitely gained a following, especially with recent events and stuff like that. So he could easily be swaying and, shifting the narrative to fit what he needs it to be. I mean, because we have no idea, because if he had gotten information of those other deaths, like if he had gotten video to show that it was the executioners, that'd be one thing. But these are bodies that could be unrelated, which they could be related. They could be victims of the executioners, but it could easily be like no, they just happen to get murdered, and he's just fit, like I said, they're just meant to fit the narrative that he's creating about, this being God's will, and that God is, try to punish him. And even Kyung-hoon had brought up the point of like, is this really righteousness? If people are trying to be quote unquote good out of fear, like, does that make it good? But he was like, yeah, but that's the only way you're going to get people to be good, is if they know damnation is waiting for them. Like, fear is the greatest motivator. Because and I always go back to this because I think it's such a fundamental and interesting philosophical point, is like the good place. Once again, if your reasonings for doing so, and this also comes up most recently in a show I watched called American Rust, but the principle is still like, if your reasons for doing something are selfish, then like it takes away like the good nature of it, because you were doing it for self-centered reasons. So if you're doing it because you're like, oh, I'm being good because I think it's going to save my soul, is going to prevent me from being bound to hell, that means you're not doing it just because it's the right thing to do, because the whole conversation becomes a conversation about autonomy. So it's like God's already predetermined, like, right, like we don't have any actual autonomy. We can't just be ourselves. God wants us to be in fear of damnation and going to hell. So he wants that fear to motivate us to be good rather than trusting us as humans to make our own choices to be good, you know? But Jinsu's perspective is that, you know, humans, like, will they really make the choice? As I look at the person who murdered your wife, is he actually remorseful? Is he regretting the decision he made? Like, you know, it's like without fear motivating you to be like, oh, hell is going to be coming to my way if I don't lead a good life, if I'm not remorseful, if I'm not repentful, if I'm not, you know, so it's interesting. It's so fascinating when you kind of break it down. And I think like that in itself, I believe, as Cole was talking about on RT podcast, that would be like the crux of what this story is going to be. But it's an interesting perspective to have that, like I said, the supernatural stuff be the background stuff while this kind of acts as the forefront. I personally think it's interesting. Especially because you also have not only like the police investigating, you have, God, I'm blanking on the lawyer's lady's name now. I think her first name is Min. I might be thinking of, her name is, I think it's Min. I might be thinking of the lady that comes in later on. I believe I might be. But it's like, I'm blanking on it. I'll get it correct next episode, I'm sure, but I'm blanking on it right now. But the lawyer, she's representing the people that have been wronged by Arrowhead. I guess the people that have been put on blast by Arrowhead. And one ended up being the teacher who got the crap beat out of him. And so, because even he's like, so were they right? Like, that thing that attacked, like, was that something like, no, it couldn't be, right? It was just, it had to be something else, right? It couldn't be actual God's judgment. And both the lawyer and Kyuhun are, like, super quiet because they're like, I don't know what to tell you. They're still investigating it. Neither one really knows. She even goes to her offices later, and, like, her office are tagged up by people being like, oh, yeah, like, essentially calling them out because it's like, oh, like you're trying to help these people. It's like, no, they're bad people. Like, we know what we're doing. We know what we're talking about, type of thing. So she meets with the mother who like went home to her children, and then the decree was sent. Like the angel, because the whole thing is an angel comes to you, gives you the timetable when you're going to die. 5 days. 5 days later at this specific time it references, that's when the executioner show up to kill you. So she was told by this angel, like, you're going to die in like 5 days at 3 p.m. And the video, like her son captured it on video. Now, she seems like an innocent woman, but that's going to be the thing of when we dig deeper into it to find out whether or not she really is. So she actually went to the New Truth, and Jinsu saying like, oh, can we live broadcast your death? Because her son convinced her to go to them because they would know what's really going on. And my part of me wonders, like, why would she willingly do that? Are they going to, like, now, because she didn't, maybe we'll get more context next episode, but did they promise her something like, oh, don't worry, we'll take care of your children. They'll be looked after. Like, you're going to, there's no fighting this. This is going to happen. You are going to die, and you're going to be bound for hell. But at the very least, when that's all said and done, you will be able, like, your family will be taken care of in your absence, so don't worry about that. All you have to do is let us broadcast it. Once again, he needs this because he currently, to what we know, he only has 2 videos showcasing that. He has, once again, other bodies saying like these were victims of it, but he needs more ammunition. He needs more proof. And if he could get not only like a recorded video, a live stream of it, then that's just going to move more people to join his cause, is what that is. So, and just this smug look on his face of like, yeah, like the power he's going to gain from this. You know, it's like he seems like he's like, oh, I'm respectful. I'm just trying to help people out. I'm trying to lead people to be good. But it's like, no, you can't trust, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And you're definitely tiptoeing in how so many people bow themselves to you because they believe you to be a good person. They believe that you will be their salvation. Like following you and being a good person will prevent them from experiencing this and going to hell, So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where the next episode takes us with this. Like always, I'm watching these one at a time, watching and reviewing these one at a time. So by the time you are hearing this, all the other episodes should be already reviewed and the review should already be up. But yeah, I'm excited to dive deeper in this series and see where everything takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.